Sarah Miller was an ordinary woman living a quiet life in a small town in the United States. She worked as a nurse in a local clinic and spent most of her days helping people who needed care. Her life was simple. She didn't have much money, but she had a kind heart and believed that doing the right thing was always more important than chasing success or comfort. For months, Sarah had been saving money for an important trip. Her younger sister, Emily, who lived in another state, had recently given birth to a baby girl. Sarah had not seen her sister in nearly 2 years, and she was very excited to finally meet her newborn niece. She worked extra shifts at the clinic, skipped eating out, and avoided unnecessary spending just to afford the plane ticket. Finally, the day of the trip arrived. The airport was crowded that morning. People rushed through the large halls pulling suitcases behind them, checking their watches, and looking at the departure boards. Sarah held her small bag tightly as she walked quickly toward the security check. Her flight was scheduled to depart in less than an hour, and she didn't want to take any chances. After passing security, she looked at the screen and saw that boarding for her flight would start soon. She felt a wave of excitement and relief. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. But as she hurried toward her gate, something unexpected caught her attention. Near a row of chairs not far from the walkway, an elderly man suddenly lost his balance. His suitcase slipped from his hand, and he slowly fell to the ground. Papers from his bag scattered across the floor. For a moment, the people around him looked in his direction. Then most of them simply kept walking. Some passengers were too busy. Others glanced at him briefly but continued rushing toward their flights. In a place where everyone was in a hurry, stopping for someone else seemed like a delay no one wanted. Sarah slowed down. She looked toward her gate and then back at the old man. Her mind was filled with conflict. If she stopped to help him, she might miss her flight. The ticket had cost her months of savings. Missing it would mean losing money and possibly not seeing her sister for a long time. But leaving him alone didn't feel right. Taking a deep breath, Sarah turned around and walked toward the elderly man. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked gently as she knelt beside him. The man looked shaken and embarrassed. "I'm fine, I just lost my balance," he said quietly. Sarah helped him sit up and carefully gathered the papers scattered across the floor. She placed them back in his bag and lifted his suitcase beside him. Noticing that he looked pale, she offered him a bottle of water from her bag. "Please drink a little," she said kindly. The man accepted it with a grateful smile. Sarah then waved to a nearby airport employee and explained that the elderly man needed assistance. Within a few minutes, airport staff arrived with a wheelchair to help him. Sarah stayed with him until she was sure he was comfortable and safe. When everything was finally settled, she stood up and glanced toward the large departure screen. Her heart dropped. The word next to her flight number had changed. It now said, "Departed." Sarah stared at the screen in disbelief. The flight she had worked so hard to afford was already gone. Airplane Sarah stood frozen in front of the departure screen for a few seconds. The word, "departed," felt heavy in her mind. She had known there was a chance this might happen, but seeing it confirmed made her heart sink. She slowly looked down at her ticket and sighed. All the extra shifts she had worked, all the money she had carefully saved, and the excitement she had felt about meeting her newborn niece suddenly seemed very far away. Missing this flight meant she would probably need to buy another ticket, and she wasn't sure she could afford it right now. For a moment, Sarah felt a wave of disappointment. But then she reminded herself why she had missed the flight in the first place. She had helped someone who needed help. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her small bag and began walking toward the customer service desk to ask if there was any way she could reschedule her flight. Even if it took days or weeks, she would eventually find a solution. As she walked across the terminal, she suddenly heard a familiar voice behind her. "Excuse me, young lady." Sarah turned around. It was the elderly man she had helped earlier. But this time something was different. The man was standing straight, no longer looking weak or confused. Beside him were 2 airport employees and a man in a formal suit who looked like a senior staff member. They all seemed to be treating the old man with a great deal of respect. Sarah felt slightly confused. "Sir, are you feeling better?" she asked politely. The old man smiled warmly. His eyes showed genuine gratitude. "Much better," he replied. "And that's because of you." Sarah shook her head modestly. Anyone would have helped. The airport employees exchanged quiet smiles as if they knew something she didn't. The old man then continued speaking. I noticed you stayed with me even though you were in a hurry, he said. Most people walked past without stopping. Sarah shrugged softly. You looked like you needed help. My flight wasn't more important than someone's health. The man nodded slowly, clearly impressed by her answer. Then he said something that completely shocked her. You missed your flight because of me, didn't you? Sarah hesitated but finally nodded. Yes, but it's okay. I'll figure something out. The old man chuckled gently. I think we can do better than that. He turned to the man in the suit beside him. Please arrange a seat for her on the next flight to her destination, he said calmly. And make sure it's in first class. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Oh no, sir, that's really not necessary, she said quickly. The airport employees smiled again, and the old man looked at her kindly. My dear, he said, there is something you don't know. He paused for a moment before revealing the truth. I happen to be the owner of this airline. Sarah's mouth fell open in complete shock. The man she had helped without thinking twice, was the owner of the airline whose flight she had just missed. The old man smiled warmly once more. Kindness like yours deserves to be rewarded, he said. People like you remind the world that humanity still matters. Within minutes, the staff prepared everything for her new flight. Sarah walked toward her gate again, this time holding a first-class boarding pass, still amazed by what had just happened. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change everything. Airplane Sarah sat quietly in the comfortable first-class seat, still trying to process everything that had just happened. The soft leather chair, the extra space, and the warm welcome from the flight attendants felt completely unreal to her. Just an hour earlier, she had been standing in the airport feeling worried and disappointed after missing her flight. Now she was sitting on the same airline's next plane, treated like a special guest. She gently held the boarding pass in her hands and smiled to herself. Life had a strange way of surprising people. A few minutes later, the elderly man slowly walked down the aisle of the plane. Even though he was the owner of the airline, he carried himself with calm simplicity. When he saw Sarah, he stopped beside her seat. May I sit for a moment? He asked politely. Of course, Sarah replied, still a little nervous. He sat in the empty seat next to her and looked out the window for a second before speaking. You know, he said thoughtfully, I travel through airports almost every week. I see thousands of people rushing from one place to another. Everyone is busy. Everyone is focused on their own problems. He turned to Sarah with a gentle smile. But today I saw something rare. Sarah looked at him curiously. A person who was willing to stop. Sarah felt a little embarrassed by the compliment. I was just doing what felt right, she said quietly. I'm a nurse, so helping people is part of my life. The old man nodded with interest. That explains a lot. He then shared something personal. When I was younger, I was not a wealthy man, he said. In fact, I once struggled to afford a bus ticket to visit my family. One day, when I was sick and alone in a station, a stranger helped me. That moment changed my life. I promised myself that if I ever became successful, I would never forget the importance of kindness. Sarah listened carefully, realizing that behind the powerful airline owner was a man who had once faced difficulties just like anyone else. The plane engine slowly began to start, and passengers prepared for takeoff. Before standing up, the old man reached into his coat pocket and handed Sarah a small card. If you ever need help in the future, he said, don't hesitate to contact me. Sarah looked at the card. It had his personal contact information. I don't know what to say, she said honestly. Just keep being the person you already are, the man replied. Then he added with a friendly smile, the world needs more people like you. A few hours later, the plane safely landed at Sarah's destination. When she finally walked out of the airport, her sister Emily was waiting with the tiny baby in her arms. Sarah ran toward them and hugged them both tightly. Your trip must have been exciting, Emily laughed. Sarah smiled warmly as she held her little niece for the first time. You have no idea, she said. And deep in her heart, she knew something important. Missing that flight had been the best decision she could have made. Because sometimes, choosing kindness opens doors that we never expected. Airplane.